Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens. Dark horse is a term for those who triumph against the odds, for the winners that nobody saw coming. And Dark Horse is the very appropriate title of the new book by Harvard researcher Todd Rose, which looks at men and women who've achieved impressive success, even though nobody saw them coming.
Todd joins us now to share his insights into why the standard formula for success may not be the best formula for you. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Tell us more about where the term dark horse came from.
Yeah, so it's an old term, right? It came from actually back in an actual horse race where, a horse no one knew kind of burst forward and won. But, for most of the time we've used it to describe people, as you said in the open, that people were successful that nobody saw coming. And we were just interested in these folks and what, if anything, they might teach us about how we live lives of success ourselves.
And you have a very different background yourself. You dropped out of high school and had 2 kids before the age of 20, and I believe you were on welfare as well. Yet you've created this fulfilling, meaningful, enviable life by taking your own road. Can you talk to us about how you did this?
As you said, I'm a Harvard professor now, but, I'm a high school dropout, and it's even kind of worse, right? Like, so when I failed out, I had a 0.9 GPA. So
wow,
you have to try really hard to do that. And it's like I was working a string of minimum wage jobs and relying on welfare. It's interesting. So there was a moment where things turned around for me. Now, it's not everything, but it's the start. And it was actually a piece of advice my dad gave me. Things looked really dark and people felt like maybe I was just really lazy. And, I'd have literally like 10 jobs in 2.5 years. And he said, look, I don't think you're lazy, but he said, if you want something better, you need to figure out what truly motivates you. And you need to stay close to that the rest of your life. Because he felt like when I was motivated, I was great at what I did, but when I wasn't, I wasn't. And so that small piece of advice put me on a completely different path. It led me to get a GED, eventually go to night school for college, and then I went to Harvard for my doctorate, and then here I am. And we can dig into some of the other details if you'd like, but that moment was really important.
And you and your co-author are involved in the Dark Horse Project at Harvard. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so that's where the book comes from. So it was really a passion project. So, most of my work and our work is in the space of this thing called the science of individuality, which explores patterns on their own terms rather than averaging everyone together. That science has led to a lot of breakthroughs in like personalized medicine and personalized nutrition and personalized education. And so I'm always eager to think about sort of the quirkiness of individuals. Well, I'd always had this like I was eager to know, like I know I had my own individual path that wasn't the same as everybody else's. And I thought, there's got to be more people like this. And I wonder if we could learn something. And so we just started, normally we're both numbers guys. Like we were trained in hard science. And this was the first qualitative research we'd ever done because we thought like we just need to talk to people. And so we've been able to talk to hundreds of people from all walks of life. And it turns out, honestly, like I'm a complete convert now to this. Like, if you just listen to people, you can learn a lot, right? Like,
oh, it's so true.
Yeah, imagine that rather than just assuming we know a lot. And, it was so fascinating. And just like, I had originally thought that what we'd learn is that to be a dark horse, you have like a certain kind of personality, like a Steve Jobs or a Richard Branson, right? Like, like you kind of like bucking the system. That's really what I thought would happen. And it just wasn't true. Like their personalities were all over the board. Some were pretty timid, really outgoing. And it just, what they kept wanting to talk about was the way they made choices and their determination to prioritize personal fulfillment. And it wasn't what we were looking for, but boy, it really shone out clear.
From your research, what's typically the turning point for most people where they decide that it's okay to be a dark horse?
Yeah. So every one of them has a turning point, which was so fascinating. And I think it's pretty normal if you live in a standardized world that at some point you realize what's going on in your life isn't enough. It's not okay. You're not happy, right? You're not that sense of satisfaction. And what's interesting is there really are two kinds of dark horses that we found out of all these folks. One group is the folks that really struggle early, so I would probably fall into that category. And then they go on to have success, and come out of nowhere, right? But the other group, which I think is really fascinating, were folks that you would deem as successful before, like really successful, but they're not happy, and they suddenly just realize, like, you know what, it's not good enough. And they make these pretty big pivots into something completely different, and then they're really successful. And you're like, wow. But in either case, it's usually that recognition that, like, something's not right in your life.
What role does fear play in this in terms of making just a big change?
You know, that's a great question. I think that fear usually ends up, like, inhibiting people from making the kind of decisions they're going to need to make, right? And so what we see is usually people have to get to a point where, you know, the idea of the unknown is less scary than the fact of, like, I don't want to keep living this life where even if I'm making a lot of money or being successful, I know it's not fulfilling. Like, it's almost like wasting what I have to offer. And it's usually when they get to that point where they can make that step. It's not that they're not afraid. Everyone gets nervous when you have to go away from your comfort zone. But it's like the desire for fulfillment becomes stronger than the fear.
So what should you do if you're considering going on that different path, say not attending college or not sticking with the job that you've had all of your life and trying to figure out if that's the right move for you? Is there any set kind of a thing that you need to follow?
Yeah. So while everybody's journey will be different for sure, the thing that we found, like, consistently is that before you make that move, what dark horses have as their foundation is this incredible sense of who they are, and it means something really specific to them. So when we think of who we are, most of us think of what we do for a living or what we're good at. And, like, dark horses think about what truly motivates them, like what really matters to them, and that's their identity. And the reason I say this is, if you don't have a good sense for what motivates you, like the range of things that motivate you, then it's not a good time to make that jump, because you're just as likely to make the next decision based on the same criteria you did that got you where you are in the first place.
Yeah.
So there's this time of really looking inward and saying, I need to understand what truly moves me. And it sounds so easy, but, like, our society is constantly telling us that we should be motivated by the same things that everybody else is motivated by. And in the Dark Horse Project, what we found is this incredible individuality in the things that really move you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Nobody Told Me. We wanted to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor for this episode, Green Chef, which is a USDA-certified organic company that includes everything you need to easily cook delicious meals you can feel good about.
Green Chef's meal plans include paleo, vegan, vegetarian, keto, gluten-free, omnivore, and carnivore. You can switch your meal plan and change the box you're getting whenever you want. The ingredients come pre-measured, perfectly portioned, and mostly prepped. Everything is hand-picked and delivered right to your door.
And it's so exciting to open the Green Chef box and see what's inside. We ordered the vegetarian plan and enjoyed maple glazed squash with figs one night, Japanese vegetable fritters another night, and pasta puttanesca for dinner another night. We loved every one. These are recipes with gourmet flavor you typically find only in restaurants.
Recipes are quick and easy to prepare with step-by-step instructions and beautiful, colorful photos to guide you along. Check it out for yourself. We're thrilled to offer Nobody Told Me listeners a special offer. For $50 off your first box of Green Chef, go to greenchef.us/NTM. Again, that's greenchef.us/NTM.
And you say there are 4 elements of the Dark Horse mindset. What are those?
So the first one is knowing your motives, what we call micro motives, because they're not just these big things. They're like the things that are deeply personal to you. And that was the first one, because it is, again, like, if you don't know that, like, it's really hard to live a fulfilling life. But as you explore those things, and in the book, you know, we kind of lay out some practical ways that people can actually get a handle on that. And I think it's pretty straightforward if you know how to take those steps. But then, like, the second element we found was that, like, dark horses are really good at making choices. And it sounds weird because it seems like we live in a society that's just full of choices. But in fact, most of the parts of our lives that matter, we really don't, right? You can go on autopilot pretty quickly and go to school, go to college, get a job, right? And not having really thought a lot about that. Dark horses are really amazing at how they make choices, even little ones. And it's about looking at the best fit between your individuality and that choice, and always optimizing against that. So knowing your motives, turning that into purpose by making good choices. Then off of that, one of the things that was just amazing is what we call the third one is like knowing your strategies. And I absolutely loved this insight from Dark Horses, which is when we think about getting good at things, right? Because fulfillment requires more than just being content. You actually have to accomplish things, right? And so, like, how do you get good at things that you care about? Well, Dark Horses show us this really great thing, which is most of us get hung up on like our strengths and our weaknesses. And we're like, if we could find things that are our strengths and we play on them, it's like, that's fine, except for strengths can change in a hurry, right? Like they can change in different contexts. They can go away as you get older, like new ones can emerge. What Dark Horses show us is that for anything that you want to get good at, there's always multiple strategies that you could use to accomplish it. And you've got to pick the one that best fits you. And that seems kind of like maybe even obvious, but it was so remarkable to see these dark horses in all the different fields who will just like approach a task and suddenly they'll just start cycling through different strategies until they find the one that clicks. And for a while, they look really, really inefficient, right? Like as if they're just spinning their wheels. Mm-hmm. And they're just looking for the right strategy. And I can give you a bunch of examples if you want to circle back to it. But this strategy thing is really fundamental. Like if you get into your mind, whatever you want to accomplish, there is a way for you to do it. It's just the right way is going to depend on who you are. And it's probably not going to be the one-size-fits-all approach that society tells us. And so the final one is in some ways the most controversial, but I actually think the most the one I like the most, which is we call ignore the destination. And what's so fascinating is, in our society, we tell people all the time, like, what are you going to do when you grow up, right? When I have kids, and it's like when they were in 10th grade, everyone was asking, like, what are you going to do? And they're like, I don't know. And it feels like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, how are you going to, and it's like, so we get obsessed about the destination, right? And I hear people like, I'm going to be a lawyer. And you're like, man, you're like 12 years old. I mean, you maybe, but like, and so the reason why this is so bad is that it takes the focus off of where it should be, which is these earlier things, like truly getting to know what motivates you and realizing that you have all these decisions to make in your life, big and small, right in front of you, that need your attention. And the thing is like, for example, let's say someone's like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to go to Harvard Law School. And you're like, okay, maybe, right? But like, rather than if you start orienting toward that right now, it sort of corrupts your decision-making process. And by the way, any parents of kids in high school know exactly what I mean when I remember when my eldest son used to take classes in high school because they were interesting to him, right? And he would explore things that he'd never tried before. And then I remember the day when he stopped doing that, and he started taking classes that looked good for a college application, right? And I think that's like toxic, right? Like you're suddenly making choices based on some destination that somebody else has told you is important, rather than continuing to make the choices based on who you really are, because that's the path for fulfillment.
You talk about the importance of knowing ourselves and knowing our motives as thoroughly as possible before we embark on our own journey as a dark horse. But if we haven't really found anything that we're passionate about, but know that the traditional path isn't the way we want to go, how do we go about doing that and finding that passion? Yeah,
that's great. And I love the connection to passion, because passion is when your motives are aligned to the thing you're doing, right? You get this sense of passion. And so here's a really easy way to start. And like we've road tested this, and like we got this from Dark Horses and tried it with so many people. This will seem simple, but if you try it, you'll be really amazed. If you just think about what are the things that you enjoy doing right now, right? Whether they're at work or not, like anywhere in your life, and ask yourself why. And by the way, the why is everything in this game here. So like I, for example, enjoy football, right? In fact, I actually think I'm passionate about it. But you could ask, like, is it the competition, right? Is it the fact that it's a team sport? Is it that it's outdoors? Is it that, it requires strategy, right? It's the combination of those things. As I start to understand that, I move beyond saying something like, I'm passionate about football. Like, I actually know the ingredients that are making football really interesting to me. The nice thing about that is that those things are portable, right? So as I start to realize, wait a minute, other activities that check these boxes are also likely to be quite fulfilling to me. And so what we find is as people start to get in the habit of asking themselves, what is it that I enjoy doing and why? And as you start asking that, you'll start to pretty quickly reveal this sort of broader range of your motives. And that's absolutely the first step to getting on a path to fulfillment.
What percentage of the population do you estimate lives their lives according to someone else's notion of success?
So I love this. So in addition to the Dark Horse Project, I have a think tank called Populous, and we are actually focused on understanding how the broader public thinks about success, and because I think what we can do about it, right, in terms of personalization and things like that. So we've just finished the largest study ever of the public, and so I actually have a more concrete answer than you might imagine on this. But so what's fascinating is that for the first time in any survey of the American public, we only studied the United States, we have a majority of people, about 60% of people, who have rejected the old view of success, that zero-sum comparative kind of thing, for the first time ever.
Wow.
But here, it's crazy. Like, nobody believed it. We did the study twice because we didn't believe. We were like, there's no way that many people have moved toward fulfillment and meaning and purpose, but they have. And now here's the thing that's fascinating. That 60%, we asked them, what percentage of their fellow citizens do they believe still want the old view of success, right? Now, the right answer is 40%, right? The numbers. They think 95% of their fellow citizens still want this thing, this old thing. And so what's crazy is you have a silent majority who in their heart has already made the jump, right? They want to live a life of purpose and meaning and fulfillment, and they want their kids to be educated to do that. But they believe they are a 5% minority, and as a result, they aren't even willing to tell their best friends how they view success because they think they'll look soft, right? So we've got this very interesting moment where dark horses have basically said, forget it, we're going off and doing this thing. So they have something to teach us. But there's a whole big silent majority in this country who want the same thing and just don't realize that they're part of a majority and don't quite know what to do next.
Wow. I would not have expected that at all.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the importance of sacrifice, because that was a theme that came up in the book over and over again, and I didn't expect it.
Yeah, I love this. So one of the things you can get worried about, right? Like when you hear things like fulfillment, is it seems like, okay, what, just do what feels good, follow your bliss, it can almost sound selfish, right? Or at least a luxury at best. And that's just not what we found at all. In fact, the distinguishing characteristic, and I would say this, it's probably my advice for parents that have older kids. Like, if you want to know whether your child is on a path of fulfillment or just a flake, right? Because how do you know, right? It's this sacrifice. It's this personal responsibility. Like, the dark horses never, ever shirked responsibility. They never, ever expected someone else to carry the load for them. They were willing to sacrifice for their version of fulfillment. And what's powerful about that is it's not freeloading, right? So if you see someone who's like, yeah, no, look, this is my path, this is my passion, and then you're mooching off of the rest of the world to make that happen, that is not fulfillment. It does not end well for anybody there. And so I love the fact that one of the crystal clear signs that someone is truly pursuing fulfillment is their willingness to sacrifice to get it.
What message does your work have for people who are maybe approaching retirement and feel that they always went for the cookie cutter model of success and that it may be too late for them to blossom in another area?
Oh, I love this too. So, like, I think I'm saying this. I'm saying I love your question so much. So
Well, hey, thanks.
I was going to say I love it.
We love that. Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's fun. So what was so cool about this is we didn't just study people who were early in their careers. Like, we study people who their turns happen like close to retirement, at retirement. And what's so fascinating about it is that, like, in reality, like, our society has basically said, okay, look, you've gone through the conveyor belt, you've done your tour of duty, and now, like, we're putting you out to pasture, basically, right? Like, but most people don't want that, right? They want to be able to do something, but, like, they're coming out of something where they didn't really get it, maybe didn't get a lot of fulfillment in their work, or whatever. They followed that standard path. The great news is this is not something that just ends like when you're trying. In fact, like, you have way more opportunities. Like, it's never too late to start the process of looking inside what really matters to you and learning how to make decisions off of that. And it was so inspiring to see people making such late turns in their life and still ending up with, like, years and years of, like, just deep satisfaction with who they are.
And we're a 2-generational show. And on the flip side of that, I love how you say in the book, if you expect happiness before you've paid your dues, you're scorned as a special snowflake or a spoiled brat, or worst of all, a millennial. And I totally relate to this because I'm a millennial and I feel that with other generations. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, it's I think we all realized, previous generations, it was sort of the social contract we had was like, look, it's all terrible. We're going to have to just suck it up and work. I have my father-in-law used to tell me all the time, if you're enjoying it, it's not work. Work is not supposed to be fun, right? Like, and so, like, if I'm like, I really like my job, he's like, well, that's not, And it's like there's this mentality, and look, it's fun. Like, there's some upside to that, which is like being willing to just hunker down and do what has to be done. And we're all grateful because we built a great society where we get to move on from that, right? Like I always think about John Adams, and I'll butcher this quote, but it's like he used to talk about why he was studying war so his son could study politics, so his grandson could study poetry. So what's interesting is we've built this thing where we actually, like, we do have the means to equip people to live fulfilling lives if they take the right steps. It doesn't have to come at the cost of our economy. It doesn't come at the cost of our cohesiveness. It's just we've never really had those things in place as a society until now. So it's not surprising that previous generations, this would seem unfathomable, right? Like that the stuff that seemed like a luxury is now becoming possible, and I think will become a necessity soon. So I think for those that are younger, just realize, like, looking back will only buy you so much. And that the reality is, and there's plenty of scientific evidence for this, what you really want for productivity and creativity is actually people who are deeply engaged in the work that they do, right? There's no substitute for that. And yet right now, we live, according to Gallup, the majority of Americans are disengaged at their jobs, and a majority of children are disengaged in their education. Right. So something's wrong. And I don't think looking back and saying just because people say it should be hard, like, no, we're going to move forward and we're going to put a focus on fulfillment and we're going to reap the benefits personally and collectively.
What advice would you have for a college student who is approaching the requirement of declaring a major?
So that's a tough one for them because they're right in the middle of the game, right? Which is like you've got to make some choice. And I would say this: you don't want to be the person that's bouncing around a million things because unless that's purposeful, that's just wandering. But I would say, look, if you're right there and you got to declare a major, you're going to do your best right now. But what I would say is, as soon as possible, start this process of like getting beyond what you think you're supposed to care about, like. Most of us think we're supposed to care about being wealthy. Well, I like money just like everybody else, but like it's not the primary motivator for me. And or you like status, or you like power, and it's like maybe. But my guess is there's going to be other things that really matter to you. And the sooner you can get in touch with those, the sooner you're going to be able to make a choice, even something as macro as like the major you're choosing. I would also say, look, if you're right now having to make that choice, don't be afraid to make a different choice. If in this process you've discovered something new about you, do not keep going down a path just because you're a semester into that major or 2 semesters in. If it's really based on knowledge of who you are, then make the next choice, right? Because that's not wandering. That's very purposeful. And you'll be happy. Your parents will be happy. Everyone will be better off.
Todd, you're a parent, and I'm curious to know, what is the one piece of information that you think is the most critical to share with new parents or with frustrated parents who have children that aren't excelling in a traditional environment?
Okay, so I think one of the things, and I will say this from only studying dark horses, I wish I would have been better at this as a father myself, but I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of knowing what motivates you. So for parents of young kids, I think the most important thing is you've got to help them discover this for themselves, what truly matters to them and motivates them. And it really begins with asking them. And that sounds simple, but honestly, how often do we ask our kids what matters to them and why? We spend so much time telling them what they should care about and so little time helping them discover it for themselves. And so I think it's taking that time, not just to say how was school or hey, how was soccer, but what did you enjoy about this and why? What didn't you like about it and why? And helping to cultivate the habit of asking those questions about yourself, because they're going to need to master that if they're really going to want to be on a path of fulfillment, and we can help as parents.
Who are some of the well-known successful people who are dark horses and who we can learn from? So
here's what's funny. There's plenty of people that we can name that were famous and stuff like this. In this project, we made a conscious decision that we didn't want to study them. And instead, we wanted to study everyday people because we felt like everyday people, it's they're like the rest of us. They didn't have enough money. They don't have connections like everyone else. And yet they managed to live these really enviable lives of success and happiness. And I feel like by focusing on these folks, we felt like we would learn things that would be more applicable to the rest of us, right? So while there are those kind of folks that we all can point to, whether it's a Mark Zuckerberg or Richard Branson, who do things that are just remarkable and they don't necessarily take the sort of straight path to that, I think the people that I find the most intriguing and aspirational to me are folks like an Alan Rouleau, right? Who was up in Leominster, Massachusetts. He's blue collar. He builds a little mini empire early on in his life of real estate, restaurants, and bars, and then realizes this is not fulfilling to him, right? He could have just stayed there and run victory laps the rest of his life, but instead he sells everything to go off in search of something more creative. He knew something wasn't being tapped. Flash forward, today he's one of the country's top bespoke tailors. He makes men's suits. He's one of the best in this, and it's in the book kind of tells more of his journey because it's crazy that this turns out to be his calling, but you would never have known that. No one around him knew that, and so he manages to make those choices to get there. Or someone like a Jenny McCormick, who is right now a world-renowned astronomer who discovered a planet and an asteroid and has been published in all the best scientific journals, and yet she never went to college and she doesn't even have a high school diploma.
Oh my gosh.
And
how did she do that?
It's so amazing. She drops out of high school. She's a single mom in her teens. By 18, 20, she's working fast food at a chicken restaurant, right? That's her thing. And her life is pretty bleak. And serendipitously, one of her extended relatives had her out to their home, and it was in a rural area, and they had a pair of binoculars. And he said, look, the sky's clear at night here. You should look up at the Milky Way. And she literally had never thought about the cosmos, never. And it's so captivated, the vastness, the unknown, all these things. She's like, I had to be a part of this. And she spends the next decade. She didn't go to college. She couldn't. She didn't have the money. She didn't have the time, but she would go and teach herself everything she could about this. She would go visit these free lectures at the university every time. People thought she was a student because she would go so often. But, and she starts convincing people that she could make a contribution, and people start sending her used equipment, telescopes and parts. And it turns out she has this incredible knack for a really sophisticated technique called gravitational lensing. It's like you use the gravitational pull of planets and stars that bend light to be able to detect planets so far away. So she turns out to be really good at this. And she starts contributing, and she builds a network, and she's working with scientists all over the world. And still today, this is what she does. And she's just a remarkable human being. And yet, like, how would you have ever imagined someone could contribute at that level without ever even graduating high school?
Todd, as you know, our show is called Nobody Told Me. And at the end of each show, we always ask our guests, what is your Nobody Told Me lesson? So in your case, we know you have a lot of wisdom to share, but we'll ask you, what is your Nobody Told Me lesson about success and fulfillment that you wish you'd known?
Yeah. Nobody told me, and I think nobody told any of us, that prioritizing personal fulfillment is by far the most reliable path to success and happiness. It just won't be the same path as everybody else. But that does not mean it's uncertain, and that actually succumbing to this standard path where we're treating ourselves as the same as everybody else and trying to be better is a reliable path to like mediocrity and misery, and that you can do this and you can live a life of joy and prowess. And it's right there if you just take the right steps.
And Todd, how can people connect with you on social media?
Yeah, so at L Todd Rose, LTODDROSE on Twitter or Facebook.
And Todd, we can't thank you enough for this interview. This was one of the most enjoyable ones I think we've ever had, and we could go on and on.
And inspiring, too.
Thank you. Well, the feeling's mutual, so we should do this again.
Absolutely.
We would love to.
Our thanks to Todd Rose, the director of the Mind, Brain, and Education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the co-author of Dark Horse, Achieving Success Through the Pursuit of Fulfillment. I'm Laura Owens.
And I'm Jan Black.
And you've been listening to Nobody Told Me. Thanks for joining us.